Welcome to Gladwin Free Methodist Church. Tonight we have special speaker, Professor William Wagner from Salt and Light Global with Rebuilding the Walls, a look at the health of the nation.
I'm Pastor Bill, and I want to thank you for coming out tonight, for carving out some time for this. Professor Wagner is a world-renowned constitutional expert and works in law. You just were in Peru, right? Just last week, and so I appreciate you carving out some time to come here to be with us. And before he comes, I just want to have a word of prayer with us, and I want to pray for Professor Wagner. And let's just seek the Lord right now. Father, thank you for being here with us tonight. And Father, we think about the need we see around the world for you to be made known. And Father, I think about the call you place upon us as followers of Christ to be salt and light in this world. And Father, I know that we seek to be engaged in our communities, in our state, in our country, and we pray often. And Lord, I'm convinced that as we pray and are involved, it's so important that we stay humble before you and remember that you are using us to make your love known in this world that is so broken. Father, I'm reminded that we elect people to do jobs that are bigger than them. We're in need of a surrender to you. So Father, tonight as we are here and as we meet and as we learn and as Professor Wagner presents, Father, I pray that you would stir our hearts and that you would find us to be obedient servants of you. Lord, we love you, and we thank you for being with us tonight, and we give you the glory in Jesus' name. Amen.
Good evening. How are you? What a blessing that music was, and we did not talk about this ahead of time, but you're going to see, especially that second, how fast we can get away from Jesus and how important it is to come back. We are going to talk tonight a lot about the American Constitution. We're going to talk about what's happening in your Supreme Court, but we're going to start and we're going to end with Jesus. Because as much as when we leave here tonight, we will be equipped to engage the culture, perhaps better. We're not going to win these battles, and we must fight these battles, but we're not going to win them in the legislature, we're not going to win them in the courthouse, and yes, we do a lot of work in the U.S. Supreme Court, but we're not going to change this nation's heart in the Supreme Court. We're going to change it in pews just like this. Each Sunday, each night, you all came out here on an evening. There's many things you could be doing. I don't even want to remind some of you that the basketball tournament, the big dance has started. And so, I mean, people are sacrificing. You've come here because you see that there is something wrong with this nation. You love this nation. You love your Lord. And you want to do something about it. Am I wrong? Or is that why you're here? I want to give you hope, because as bleak and as dark as it can seem out there, we're called Salt and Light Global for a reason. And Jesus on the Mount, when he gave that sermon, one of the best presentations ever the world has ever seen, you know, we understand that salt preserves, but salt also seasons. Salt also seasons. So tonight when you're done, I want you to go out and take what you learned, and I want you to season the public dialogue with truth out there. I want each one of you commit to do that today in one little way or another. You may not, do it the same way I'm doing it up here, but you may do it with your neighbor. You may do it with somebody sitting in a church pew next to you. You may do it by a letter to the editor. You may do it because you get so mad you're going to sew up at next time the legislature does something to take away your religious liberty, you're going to be talking about it in front of the legislature. However you do it, I'm going to challenge each one of you tonight to season the public dialogue with truth wherever God has put you. Now, you aren't going to go to the Supreme Court in all likelihood. You can send us. We'll go there. You may or may not be called to Africa or Mexico or someplace, China, to do missionary work, but you may not be. God may have put you right here in Gladden. And He has put all of us in a place where we have influence over the environment where we're in. I work with a lot of physicians now because I'm getting daily calls from physicians that work in hospitals. Do you know there's a major hospital in Lansing, Michigan right now? I'm getting calls from the OBGYN Christian doctors. They're saying, you know, they're going to tell us we can't talk about, they can't use the word women anymore in our, they're delivering babies. God created a woman and giving this in life, and now we might offend the transgender community if we use the word women in our advertising. I mean, oh my goodness. But guess what? God didn't send those OBGYN physicians to Africa to be missionaries. But right there in that community in Lansing, they're looking around, they're saying, this isn't the way Jesus would have it. And God puts us in places, wherever He puts us, we have the ability and the calling and the command by Jesus to make disciples of all nations. And sometimes we leave off that last part, because that last part's harder. Make disciples of all nations, teaching them all these things I've commanded of you. And we're going to talk about some of those things that He taught us, that He's commanded us to teach. And so, wherever He has put you, know that you can be of some powerful influence. If I have a PowerPoint, we do. If we could switch to the next slide. I want to start with James 4. And do you feel like our nation is completely unified? We finally got past the election. We all agree. We can all get along anymore? No. If anything, it's worse, isn't it? I mean, we do have a reprieve. We've got a government that is attempting to, take back some of the unelected administrative state where they're imposing policies that say, for example, we represent a company in. I'll wait till later to tell you about some of the places that we represent. But we are having a short little reprieve where we actually have a government that is stepping in and saying, we're going to stop abusing our power in government. And we are going to, and you can see this in agency after agency, because I'm talking to these different folks that are working in these agencies, where they are attempting to stop the inappropriate rulemaking, stop the making of laws without the people's will. Amen. The other place that we have a real serious problem of folks that like to make law and public policy without the people's will is right here in this building. And so the second thing that we're doing is we're working really hard to make sure that people that get appointed to this federal judiciary understand that their role is to decide disputes and not to make policy. Because we want people that are elected and that report to us every 2 or 6 years to make the policy. Because if we don't like the policy, then what do? We fire them and we bring in somebody else. These folks are elected for life, or are appointed for life, and we'll talk about that. So why are we so divided? Why are we so divided? Jesus all over the place talks about unity. I'm working on a unity talk because on National Day of Prayer, somebody's asked me to give this talk about Christian unity. And oh my goodness, you go all over the Bible. Jesus wants us to be unified. But we're not. Tonight we're not going to talk about unity. We're going to look at why we're divided. Why are we so divided? Take a look at this. Study your history a little bit. We're more divided right now in this nation ideologically, far more divided ideologically than we were just before the Civil War. Now, the things that divide us now are different than the things that divided us before the Civil War, and things that divided us before the Civil War were driven by a lot of economic interests, and so people were willing to start shooting each other a lot quicker than maybe they are now, which is good. But it's not good for our nation that we are this divided. not good for the church that we're this divided. So it probably behooves us to take a moment to ask, well, what does God say about why are we divided? What causes the fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from the desires, the Bible says, that battle within you? Now, if you take that word desire and you look it up in the original ancient Greek, it's interesting because you can take that word right there and almost take the Supreme Court's opinions on same-sex marriage and abortion and our right to sexuality, do whatever we want if it feels good. That's what that word in the Greek means, desires. It is a word that is connected with sexuality, pleasures, lust, sensual delight. You can replace that word with, the Supreme Court replaces that word desires with personal autonomy and identity. It's all about me and my personal identity. It's no longer about doing to others as you'd have them do unto you. No, it's all about me and my identity and what I want. And if you don't like it, well, we'll make it a hate speech crime. And so, isn't it interesting that in James 4, when the question is asked, what's dividing you? Way back then, the answer back then is the same answer as what's dividing us now, so many hundreds, thousands years later. This goes all the way back, I think, even farther than the New Testament. We can go back to, let's say Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God. And He created all these incredible things that we look out at our creation. You can see the stars in the sky. You can see them much better than I can because I'm closer to Detroit, but out in Lansing. But you can see these beautiful, incredible stars in the sky. You see the trees. Even the snow can be pretty spectacular if you're thinking about it in November and not necessarily March right now. But you can see all the spectacular powers of His creation when you look at the beautiful birds and think of the majestic eagle and think of the trees and think of, it's just all the things that He's created. And after He created each one of those things, He said it was good. And then He created us. He said He created man and woman. Not man, something in between, and woman. Not man, if you want to change your mind, woman. No, He created man and woman. He created these chromosomes, and they determine whether you are a man or a woman. And by the way, these chromosomes are not social constructs. So if somebody tells you that your identity is based on a social construct that happens somewhere between 4 and 7 years old, you tell them, no, my identity is based on the chromosomes that God created, and it decided that I was going to be a man or I was going to be a woman, and chromosomes are not a social construct. But when He got done with all that, He didn't say it was good. He said it was very good. He said it was very good. And when God's about the business of doing good and doing very good, it doesn't take the devil very long before he's got to come in and mess with it, right? And so what does he do? And he comes to Eve and he says, did God really say? Did God really say? Because, they've been given the, domain over the kingdom. They were to have good stewardship over all this creation. And they're just supposed to just follow the rules. That's all God wanted them to do, is to love me and to obey me. And just don't touch this tree over here. I'm going to give you free will, but don't touch this tree. Did God really say? God doesn't, He didn't say that. You won't surely die. God said they'd surely die. You won't surely die, the devil says. In fact, you can be just like God. You don't have to have God's standard over here to follow. You can follow your own standard. It can be all about your personal autonomy. It can all be about your personal identity. It can be about your desires. It can be about your desires, not God's. Wow. And you think that this all started recently in our Supreme Court. This happened in the garden. And the battle between right and wrong, good and evil, has been raging ever since. And it's those things that divide us. It's the thing that causes the division in this nation, the fights and the quarrels among us. And the next verse, isn't this amazing? You adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity with God? Don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity with God? Now it's interesting when you look up the Greek with regard to the word friendship, and you look up the word enmity, and you look up adulterous people, and all of a sudden you see, wow, there's just, this has been something that's been going on for a very long time. Adulterous people, you are being unfaithful to God. The Greek, it's very clear that the meaning is unfaithfulness to God. Friendship. Okay, I'm going to have friendship with the world. I'm going to have not just a friendship, but the Greek brings out a kind of a relationship more like it's a fondness of the world. I love the world, almost in a relationship with it. So I have this fondness of the world, this friendship with the world, and what does that mean? That means enmity. Now, in the Greek, it's much stronger than in the English. In the enmity, it's a hostility, it's a hatred, and by implication, it's the very reason for me to live and oppose God. That much hatred, that the reason that I live is I have that much hatred that I'm going to oppose God. And so, people that are going to be unfaithful to God know that we have a fondness and a friendship for the world so that we can be all about our personal autonomy and our identity and our desires. And that means that we are going to hate God so much that we won't just hate God in the privacy of our home. We will be out on the streets, and we'll be in the halls of the state legislatures to make sure that our view will prevail. So therefore, anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. Wow. How does that look here in this nation? Well, we know about abortion, and we know about partial birth abortion, and we know about engaging in all kinds of sexual conduct outside of marriage. We now know that marriage is no longer marriage, it's now whatever you want it to be. And we also now see that people say, well, that's the end of it. See, we finally got ourselves. No, that's not the end of it, is it? Within hours after the same-sex marriage decision coming down, Time Magazine was calling for all churches in the United States to have their nonprofit status taken away, and their property should be taxed. Well, how did we get here? What is this personal autonomy? What are these desires that have now been enshrined in our Constitution? And I say that because they have been, but I want to put enshrined in our Constitution in quotes, because it happened illegitimately. And if you have a Constitution, and you all should have one and carry it with you and take a look at it from time to time, in Article 5 of the Constitution, there is a place in the Constitution to change it if you want to. You want to change the meaning of it, you want to add new liberties, you want to amend the Constitution, and I'm not going to go into it because it's kind of a long presentation itself, but there's two ways you can do it, and they both involve the people in the states. Politically accountable to the government that would be amending the Constitution. There's some political accountability involved. Well, if you don't want to go through that process, especially because you won't be able to get the support of the people to do that, do you think if they wanted to go out and get the support of the people to kill unborn sons and daughters even during childbirth? Do you think if they wanted to, when they tried to get the support of the people for same-sex marriage, they didn't? You know, the press reported how all these states were being added on to the list of supporting same-sex marriage, but if you go back and look at the vast majority of none of that was true. The states were all on the other side of it, including Michigan. And the people voted the opposite way. Well, then they found some federal judge, usually a single federal judge, wearing a robe with ink in his pen, and he decided, well, I'm going to just undo the will of 2.7 million Americans, Michiganders. Well, how did they do that? They didn't use the Constitution to change it. They didn't use the Constitution to add abortion in here. They didn't change the Constitution to say all kinds of, and we've got children here, so I'm not going to go into it, sexual conduct is going to be permissible. Imagine. And then I will tell you it's way beyond your imagination what they're talking about. Well, guess what? The press never reports this. But I'm telling you truth right now. I'm going to seize the public dialogue with truth. I promise you I'm not exaggerating. I taught constitutional law for most of my life as a professor. I practiced constitutional law all before that as a federal judge and as a United States, an attorney for the United States. None of those are rights enshrined in the Constitution. Well, you all know that. But none of them are individually standing alone rights either. There's one constitutional right that the court has created, inappropriately. That one constitutional right, the desired constitutional, well, let's call it the desired constitutional right since we're looking at James 4. The right to desire is the right of personal autonomy and identity. What they haven't told you in the press, and which you can go read for yourself if you want to. If you want to just read all these cases, you can actually see it for yourself. You don't have to be a lawyer to do it. Is they created this right of personal autonomy. They did it before abortion, but then they said, you know, we were talking about this right of personal autonomy to do whatever you want in the bedroom. And you know what? I guess that means, you know, there could be a consequence of that. A baby could be conceived, and you shouldn't have to, you know, be bothered by that. So we're going to say that this right of personal autonomy and identity, this right of desire, applies to abortion. Now that was a huge shift in our nation. Let me tell you why. Government has always been allowed, and quite properly, and this is biblical, to regulate unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct. The Bible talks about what? The proper role for government is to condone that which is good and punish that which is evil. Now, beyond that, protecting, you know, our nation and protecting our liberties, you know, I don't see anything in the Bible that authorizes the government to raise your family or to tell you how to raise your children. I don't see anything in the Bible that tells you, you know how your church must preach or who they must marry. But, you know, we've got government stepping into those realms. But the one proper place that government has the authority is to maintain order, protect us, and therefore protect us against unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct. What is more dangerous, unhealthy, and immoral than killing somebody's unborn son or daughter? And so that unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct was against the law in virtually every state. Most states, I think it was 47 states. The people had a discussion in their states, and then through the elected representatives who they elect, they implemented those laws that said that unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct is something that the government quite properly should be able to regulate. And so doctors couldn't do it. Doctors couldn't do it. Well, they found if you want to engage in that unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct, and you don't want the government to say you can't, and if you're a doctor and you don't want that to be against the law, what do? Well, you go find a few judges wearing robes with ink in their pen, and you say, well, why don't you recharacterize all that unhealthy, dangerous conduct? Why don't you call it liberty? Why don't you make it a new constitutional liberty? So that's what they did. And that's what they did. And they had Supreme Court opinions in Griswold versus Connecticut that led up to Roe versus Wade that enshrined into the Constitution, right next to your First Amendment, a right of free speech and right of religious conscience, and your 14th Amendment right of due process, your right to free speech in your First Amendment, your right to protect yourself and bear arms in the Second Amendment. They added to that list desire, personal autonomy, and identity. But they didn't do it in a way that the Constitution says to do it. They did it with ink in their pen. They said now, and nobody stopped them. And so now it became part of our Constitution. Toward the end of the night, I'll talk about how you can stop that kind of stuff and how we can undo it. But that's what happened. That's how we got it. Not because we voted for it. Not because we sent our members to Congress and asked them to use the process in the Constitution to add it to the Constitution. A few lawyers wearing robes wrote the desires that battle within you into our Constitution as liberty. Wow. So, what's the result? What's the result? Well, the latest, after, abortion, then we had partial birth abortion. That's a child during childbirth. We had laws struck down that prohibited that kind of conduct by a doctor because it interferes with all my desires. It interferes with my personal autonomy. And then, we saw all other kinds of sexual conduct that we're not going to talk about tonight because of the makeup of the audience. And then same-sex marriage. And the latest thing we're dealing with is, I don't know if you're dealing with it up here, but all over the state we're dealing with school boards that are saying, you parents get out of the way, you're way backwards, it's time for us to be progressive. Don't you understand we have this right of personal autonomy right now? And men, if they feel like a woman, should be able to go in your little girl's bathroom and shower at your public school. And if you disagree, get out of our way. We have that going on in any of the counties or the places here. It's happening all over Michigan right now. We're representing a number of places. Well, if we could just, let's take the next screen. And what I want to do in the next little while is I want to go through some of the cases that our offices are dealing with right now and illustrate that battle that's going on and maybe better help you understand how we can respond to some of these issues. In addition to creating that, what I call a fake constitutional right of desire, personal autonomy, and identity, what the court also did in the 1970s is they decided to change the meaning of the Establishment Clause. Now, our religion clause is pretty cool. Because if you go to the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or the free exercise thereof. That was a stroke of genius. It ended hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of religious wars. It basically says, plain meaning of the language, basically says, if you look at it, government, nobody gets to make their religion our government. So the Baptists don't get to control the government, the Church of God people don't get to control the government, the Methodists don't get to control the government, the Lutherans don't get to control the government. Nobody gets to control, nobody gets to say that the government shall be my religion and all legislation has to be consistent with my religious tenets, the way I see the Bible. You know, with me so far? At the same time, government, you cannot mess with anybody's religion. You cannot mess with you can't come in and interfere with anybody's free exercise of their faith. So, it was genius. What it did, it ended literally hundreds and hundreds of years of wars where different religious factions were fighting over who would control the legislation in the government. Now, this doesn't say that Christian people can't use their Christian principles and the things that they've learned from the Bible and the Christian tenets to help them govern quite properly. In fact, when we did that, we did nothing less than end slavery in this nation, because it was religious ideas that informed our policymakers that ended slavery. But if you don't want Christians to be able to look to the Bible, to be informed by sacred principles and sacred ideas, what do? You find a few lawyers wearing robes. That's what they did. And they said, I want you to rewrite the Establishment Clause. Now again, if you want to rewrite the Establishment Clause, there's a place in the Constitution that you go to the people and you can say, I want to amend the Establishment Clause to no longer say established, but I want it to mean now that you got to have a secular reason for everything. They didn't want to do that because they would never have been able to get the support of the nation to do it. So what they did is they got a few lawyers wearing robes again with ink in their pen. They said, you know, the word established, we're just going to pretend it means something else from now on. And in the 1970s, there was a case came down, Lemon versus Kurtzman, that said, you have to have a secular reason for everything you do in government or every government official, or we're going to say it's unconstitutional violation of the Establishment Clause. And I look at that, government shall not establish a religious government, and all of a sudden they rewrite that to mean you have to have a secular reason for everything you do. Let me show you, and then I'm going to show you how absurd it is in a Supreme Court case that we've got right now. But do you notice every year, right around Christmas time, they want to kick baby Jesus off the courthouse steps or out of the public park? Well, first of all, does baby Jesus on the courthouse steps establish Christianity as the official religion of the United States of America or the state of Michigan and require that all Michigan laws be consistent with the Christian religion? No, of course it doesn't. So it therefore shouldn't violate the Establishment Clause. Now, does somebody putting baby Jesus on the courthouse steps, is there a secular reason for doing that? Probably not. We put baby Jesus on the courthouse steps to celebrate the birth of our Lord and Savior who came and died for our sins. And so under the new definition by the court, baby Jesus gets kicked off the courthouse steps every year. Not because it violates the actual words of the Establishment Clause, but because it violates the new meaning, the false meaning. What I contend is the no constitutional authority to write the meaning by these Supreme Court justices. What you probably haven't heard is, other places that this is happening. Did anybody see the Pierre Marquette controversy? Father Marquette? Father Marquette, we're helping out in this case and have been out there trying to publicly make the public aware of it. Father Marquette was a explorer extraordinaire. Really important figure in our nation and our state. Discovered much of Michigan. Discovered the mouth of the Mississippi River, and powerful, and powerfully important historical figure in Michigan. But he was also a missionary. And what drove him to do all this exploring was to bring the Word of God to people that had not heard it. Well, where he died, the place where he died, the people of the great state of Michigan, actually it was a private group that erected a memorial. And it's a wonderful memorial that if you go there, you can read all about the history of this important historical figure and what he did in Michigan and what he did for the nation. But guess what? Because he was a Christian, I suppose, the memorial also includes a cross. Now, remember Saul before he was Paul, what he did? He would go from city to city looking for Christians to persecute. Well, we got some guy in Michigan that is going city to city looking for crosses that he can persecute. And so he found this one in the middle of Pierre Marquette Township, which is a little teeny township, and wants to bring the full force of the left-wing, far-left, anti-Christian, legal movement against this small little township. Take this cross down. it violates the Establishment Clause. And I look at it and say, wait a minute, this, first of all, is an historical figure. So even if we use your silly little definition, you know, there is a secular reason for it being there, but that's a false doctrine. So let's look at the actual words of the Constitution. Does that memorial actually establish Christianity as the faith of the nation, requiring all our legislation to be? No. So it doesn't violate the Establishment Clause. And just so you make sure you understand, when I'm saying this, I'm not trying to be funny or not, but there are other Establishment Clauses in other countries. If you go to Iran, if you go to Saudi Arabia, you find a very different kind of Establishment Clause. It says, the established religion of this nation shall be Islam, and all legislation must be consistent with the Sharia. That's a very different kind of Establishment Clause. Ours says, nobody gets to have a theocracy, and government, you let everybody have the free exercise of their religion, and you all go and preach the gospel and share the good news of Jesus all around the world and save everybody, including everybody in Congress if they want to hear the word. So there's some simple examples. A case that we just, I just filed a brief in the U.S. Supreme Court, and what we've just done in that case is we are arguing that the court needs to revisit that 1974 opinion because it was wrongly decided. The court has no authority to change the meaning of the Constitution. What they're doing is they're saying they're changing the meaning of the Constitution, but they're doing it under the guise of they're pretending they're interpreting the Constitution. But when you change the meaning of something and you rewrite the meaning of a phrase, that's not interpreting the Constitution. Interpreting the Constitution is figuring out what that word meant when it was written, what was the context of it, what is the eternal truth in those words, and how do we apply it to a current set of facts today. They didn't do that here. They rewrote it. And so now I'm about to tell you about a case that you would never, ever in your life think was an Establishment Clause case. We just filed a brief in the Trump travel ban case. This is the second brief we've had to file. This is the second time that the matter's before the court. What the president did, and again, we don't chase the Republicans or the Democrats, we don't chase the donkey, we don't chase the elephant, we chase the truth, and we chase the Lamb of God. But it just so happens that those that oppose this administration have filed a challenge to his proclamation. The proclamation was, what they did is they went and they did an investigation involving many agencies involving many people, and they investigated all these countries, and they were trying to decide which one of these countries provide us enough information with the individuals they're sending us that we can determine whether or not these guys are terrorists or not that we're letting into our country. And if we don't get enough information from them and we can't find out who they are, then we're not going to, as a matter of national security, let them in our country. Places like North Korea, which, by the way, isn't Muslim at all. And a lot of these other places that do have majority Muslim countries. Well, guess what the challenge is? One of the main challenges to this national security travel ban, after they did all this investigation, they came to the conclusion that these countries do not provide us enough information, therefore, until they do, we're not going to let people come in from them. They said, in their challenge that is now in the Supreme Court, that this national security travel ban violates the Establishment Clause because the president must have had a religious reason for it. And the reason we know he must have had a religious reason for it, he must hate Muslims, because before he was president, when he was running for office, in his campaign rhetoric, he said some things that weren't so favorable to Muslims. So by those campaign speeches, before he was president, we know that this national security ban must be unconstitutional because it violates the Establishment Clause, because he doesn't have a secular purpose. I'm not making this stuff up. You can't make it up. That's how ridiculous this is. But this is serious because it's in the U.S. Supreme Court right now. And you got the best lawyers in the nation on the other side writing these arguments. Don't tell me that they're not after our faith. Because if they can win these arguments, that means that none of us can participate in government, or if we do, we got to make up a fake reason of why we want to protect life, or why we want to do whatever we want to do. We can't have we have to have a secular reason. We can't. Yeah, and think about this. if this judge-made doctrine was in place during the Lincoln administration, the Emancipation Proclamation would be considered unconstitutional violation of establishment clause. Why? Because Lincoln invoked, and I quote here, the favor of Almighty God. And he didn't do it in a campaign speech when he was running for office. He put it in the document itself. And so are we to say that this judge-made doctrine, or that the Emancipation Proclamation should be unconstitutional? And there's the point. You know, you can be informed by secular ideas. There may be some good secular ideas. God uses all things for good. But what these guys are saying is you only can use secular ideas to inform your policy. You can't have sacred ideas inform your policy. You can't have ideas that love your neighbor as yourself be the basis for your policy. You can't have the idea of thou shalt not steal be the basis for your policy. You cannot have the idea that thou shalt not kill be the basis for your policy. You have to come up with some secular reason for your policy. It's like one reason that somebody on the other side wants to do that. They want to eliminate all of us in this room from participating in the government of this nation, of this state. It's time we say no. And I can tell you right now, and I may be there before it's all over with, I will not bow the knee to a government that commands me to do something my Lord commands me to do, and I will not bow the knee to a government that commands me not to do something my God commands me to do. We're very close to that happening in this nation, and we're very close to some very tough choices of how we're going to respond when that happens. And I pray that when or if that happens in this nation, in this state, that you remember this night here, and you remember the commitment that you made where you will stand. Because when it happened in Germany, one church after another fell. And one church after another took down that cross and replaced it with a swastika. And one church after another took this Holy Bible out and replaced it with Mein Kampf. Very, very few churches stood firm because the cost was very high. So know that all these things I'm talking about tonight, and what I'm asking you to do, and where I'm asking you to stand, take a moral stand, we stand on the shoulders of giants. We stand on the shoulders of people that will have paid a much higher cost than we ever will. We may lose this church. We may lose our property. They may take our property. They probably will not draw and quarter us, which is a horrible way to die. But those who stand and stood for our faith before us so that we could today, they did suffer that kind of challenge. What I want to do today is I want to continue. Before we're done, I want us to be equipped so on each one of these areas, we now understand how we got there and how we can bring it back. And if we don't bring it back, well, then you call me back. I've got a whole nother, we do a day-long discussion on civil disobedience and the Christian approach to that. And before you engage in civil disobedience, man, you better hit your knees and hit your Bible, because there's a whole lot in the Bible that we need to know before we do it. In the town of Williamston, a little bigger town than here, not much. Few members of the school board decided, and the superintendent said, you know what, we're backward here. We need to start letting men in our little girls' showers. We need to start letting men take the place of women on girls' teams if they want to. And we need to start punishing people that verbally disagree with these progressive policies. So they enacted a panoply, a whole bunch of school policies for the children and the parents. Let's add to these policies. Let's make sure that we understand that we don't have to tell the parents about this stuff. About their kids. We keep the kids' stuff away from the parents. I'll tell you, I'm more of a diplomat than a fighter. But if you want war, we'll give you more war than you can handle, and that's what they've asked for. We went in politely, showed them case after case, place after place, how they didn't have to do this, how the law did not require it, how the lawyers on the other side that were telling them they had to do it were lying. And I said, it's easy to say. And one of the things we did during testimony, I said, there's a huge disparity here. They say you got to do this. We say you don't have to do it. They say you got to do this because of Title IX, because of this decision. And you know what? There's an easy way to tell which side's telling the truth. You don't need the lawyer to be able to read. That's what you guys do at this school. You teach people how to read. So read Title IX, and you read and it's exact, and then we put it right in front of them. They didn't like that because the truth was shining on the darkness right there. And they said, so what? We're going to do it anyway. We're going to do it anyway. And so we now have a lawsuit filed in federal court, 10 counts, challenging, because they're interfering with our children, with our children's rights. Now what about the rights of the little girl that's in the room? The day after this thing was passed, some guy walked in the room. See, I can come in the bathroom now. I can see you. Not make it up. It happened. This girl was tougher than the norm. She took him, basically beat the crap out of him, and dragged him out and said, no, you're not coming in here. Didn't help our lawsuit. I mean, if she would have been damaged and hurt, and I don't ever want to see damaged or hurt, but she instinctively knew it was wrong, is my point. There was a right and a wrong that God is putting on. Where does God put the law? He says he puts it on our hearts, right? She knew it was wrong. The school board knows it's wrong. I didn't see any of the men on that school board. How comfortable do you think they would have been? You know what? Maybe we should do this next time. We got people that are arrogantly jamming their social engineering down their throat. Next time they do that, some guy's doing that in the midst of the hearing. When he walks to the bathroom, he had to have about 12 women just follow him in, singing Amazing Grace or something. Just see how comfortable he feels. I'm sorry. That's the warrior. I do have a little warrior inside. Another case that we have right now, a Christian professor. I hate to say this, but at a Christian school in Wisconsin. Usually this happens in a public school. And the Constitution normally only applies to the government. So normally we wouldn't be able to help this professor because it's a private school imposing policy. Well, they fired him basically for standing up for a student who wanted to be able to share his religious conscience on the issue of, I can't remember if it was abortion or marriage or one of these hot button issues. And because he stood up for the student's right to be able to express himself, they fired him. They fired him. We're probably going to win this one in the Supreme Court of Wisconsin. And the reason we're able to do that is in his contract, the professors are given the same level of protection as if they were at a public school, and so they have the same protection for freedom of expression, free exercise of their religious conscience. And in spite of it being in their contract, they fired him for his speech and his religious expression. And you scratch our head and you wonder how we got to where we're at today. And, it's really easy sometimes to get really angry. And how many people in here are probably really angry? I'm not going to blame you if you are. I'm not going to judge you if you are. I was angry for too many years. And then it was like a lightning bolt hit me. I realized that our opposition, and this opposition can be, I tell you, they know this is war. They know this is war, which is why you see violence erupt sometimes on the other side. But it's why you see them go after reputations and willing to lie about reputations, which is why they will try and someday take away my reputation. They will someday try and take away my liberty. But there will be one of you to replace me when they do. That's the kind of opposition that we're facing. But one day I woke up and I realized that they're not just the opposition. They're also our mission field. And then I come back to here. If I could go back a slide or so. Or actually, let's go forward. Yeah, let's go back a slide. And I say, what fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from the desires that battle within you, you adulterous people? How many times have we been an adulteress? How many times have we been unfaithful to God in our own walk? How many times have we had friendship with the world? How many times was that me? And so I got to tell you, I still, it's hard, but I've engaged the opposition, and it's rare, but occasionally you'll bring them over, and occasionally they get saved, believe it or not, because they're hurting too. They're hurting too, and some of them are hurting badly. Now I got to tell you, the organizers and the leaders of these opposition groups, Antifa and some of the Equality Michigan, they're vicious, and you have to be wise as serpents about this. But understand, they're also our mission. And so let's flip two slides down, please. We continue the battle. There is all throughout the United States right now. There are, and I want you to get involved here in Michigan. Go see Michigan, the heartbeat bill. Makes sense. We now know that an unborn son or daughter has a beating heart, and so if we know it has a beating heart, the doctor knows it has a beating heart. Well, maybe that life is worthy of protection now. The other side is saying no, you can kill a baby even while it's being born. And just so you know, I'm not making this stuff up. In Canada right now, it's considered a human right to have the doctor kill the baby during childbirth. It's all about my desires. Remember, it's about my personal autonomy. And so there are a lot of really good pieces of legislation going on right now, and you gotta, but they're not moving. We can't get them through a Republican-controlled United States Senate. We've got legislation that. Let me try and refresh my recollection here. There's so many of them. Pain-capable unborn child protection act. We now know, and all scientists can show, that at a certain time during as the child is developing, as the son or daughter is developing inside the womb, they can feel pain when they're being killed. And so, we're saying, well, that life has value, worthy of government protection, that should supersede any personal autonomy. It's all about me and my desires and my identity right. The Heartbeat Protection Act, if we know that there's, a heart beating. And here's the one that just is, the Born Alive Survivors Act. Doctors now sometimes kill babies after they're born when they're attempting to have an abortion and the abortion doesn't work and the baby somehow survives. This would make it a crime to not kill the baby after it survived. And you're saying, well, you mean they do. They don't save the baby now. Wow. And you're telling me that this is our mission field? Well, I'm supposed to love that neighbor? The Civil Rights Commission. We're working on, I don't know if you remember the cake case where the Christian business owners, they were Christian business owners. They served anybody in the community. They didn't ask what their sexual preferences were or what their sexual lifestyle was. You wanted a cake, they made a cake. All right? Well, one day, one of their regular customers that they had made cakes for before came in and said, we want you to participate in a worship ceremony with us by having us, make our wedding cake. We want you to be part of this. And they said, well, wait a minute, that's one step too far. Now you're asking us to violate our religious conscience and to put our name behind something that violates what God commands us not to be. Well, take you to the commission, find you out of existence. And that's what they did. And so what we did is we worked with some folks in Colorado just to see if this was truly a civil rights commission or if it was just a hypocrisy commission. And it turns out it was the latter, because when Christian folks went into LGBTQ cake bakers and said, will you make a cake that has a Bible passage on? No, get out of here, we don't serve you. So it's only the LGBT community that gets protection of civil rights, not the Christian community. So that's what that commission is. So and the reason that was done was to expose the hypocrisy. But now that the family that lost its business and basically was found out of existence is now their case is in the U.S. Supreme Court. Very, very important case. We actually filed a brief in that case as well, representing businesses around the country that are in similar positions. And here's the interesting thing now. You gotta wonder sometimes. God has this incredible sense of humor. This Civil Rights Commission that engaged in all that improper behavior and what I would call corrupt behavior, they have a sunset provision on it. And a sunset provision means that every certain number of years, the legislature decides whether that commission is going to continue to exist again. And guess what? There's a huge movement to make sure that it doesn't exist anymore. In fact, we just were able to get the commission to not even fund the commission until we have that vote later to decide whether it should cease to exist. And so the people of Colorado are stepping up and they've been exposed for what they were. And so hopefully, the commission that caused this whole thing that's now already in the Supreme Court will never be able to do that to another business again. I don't know how much you've heard about the FISA court. The FISA court is a very it's the most secret court of the United States. It's designed to protect our national security. It now has become clear that political campaigns, secretly funneled money to pay somebody to put a political hit piece basically together, and whether it's true or not, and then use that, not just in a campaign, but used it to go to this most secret court where the other side doesn't even get to be heard, and say, we want to conduct surveillance on this presidential candidate and their campaign. And if that, well, it did happen. Now the question is, how bad is it? And whether or not anybody will. But that is the biggest, it's not treason, but that's the closest thing to treason. Certainly a felony. It's certainly cause to lose your law license if you're ever practicing again. But that's the closest thing I've seen to a coup in our nation if nothing's done about it. So we are fighting on a lot of fronts right now. Good and bad, right and wrong. Battling most of academia, which argues that there is no right and there is no wrong, there is no good and there is no bad. If you say there is, you're a bigot. I tell you, that's what the UN is saying in places like Peru, where somebody said I had just come from. And so I'm meeting with members of Congress down in Peru, and they're telling me that they're being told that they can't, have right and wrong type of positions, and they can't protect their children. They've got to let men in their little girls' bathroom. They got to have abortion. No, you don't. There is right and wrong. You just have to learn how to be able to just look at what's happening in your nation right now. And I said, do you have corruption here? And they've got a lot of corruption. And so they exposed all the corruption. They shared all the corruption that's going on. Okay, now do you know that's right or wrong? Oh, yeah, it's wrong. Well, how do you know it's right or wrong? God's put it on your heart. You know that's wrong. All right, so if that's wrong, then is it wrong for the UN to come in and tell you you have to let men go in your little girl's bathroom at your public school? And all of a sudden the light bulb goes on. We just need to be able to stand up, be unafraid, and the other side is trying to make it uncomfortable for us to respond. The more we respond, the less uncomfortable it will be for everybody else to do it. Just do it respectfully, do it in love, but do it, be unafraid. Don't be afraid to say the truth. Don't be afraid to say the truth. All right, what does Jesus say about how we're supposed to respond to this division? Can I have the last slide, please? He doesn't say, go out and kick their butt, does he? He doesn't say, go out and destroy. He said, no. Submit yourselves to God. Submit yourselves to God. And I don't know if we can get our music people up again. If you can't, remember that last song we played. I'm coming back to the heart of Jesus. You know, that is the essence of James 4:7-8. Submit yourselves unto God. We have to, each one of us, resist the devil. We have to, each one of us, to understand that when we do, he'll flee from us. We've got to come near to God, because when we do, he will come back to us. I'm telling you, this was a powerful transformation for me, because I was born a warrior. I mean, I was trained to be a legal warrior. You give me the opposition on any one of these issues in a debate, when I'm done with them, I can have them crying on the floor. Because I've been trained to do that. But my job and your job isn't to win the argument. Our job is to win their soul. And so, while we are winning the argument and showing them the error of their ways, let's be also doing it in a way that, remember, that we all have sinned and we all have fallen short, and we should be in relationship with our Lord every day. I challenge each one of you, therefore, to, here's one of our strategies, get in the Word every day if you're not there already. If you used to do that, but now you're so busy with ministry, you're not able to get that hour in the morning, you know, he misses you. He wants you to kind of come back into relationship with him. And the way you do that is spending time in his Word every day. And when you do, we will want to love him, and we will want to obey him, and we will want to submit ourselves to him. We want to come under his authority, purify our hearts, and no longer be double-minded. Because James talks, and I'd love to do the whole talk on double-mindedness. You know, we can't have one foot in the world and one foot in the church and expect the world then to listen to what we have to say. And I say this to you as a sinful, broken vessel as anybody else. And I work on this and have to work as hard, probably harder than most, every day. There's the answer. I'd like to challenge each one of you again. Now that we've equipped ourselves a little bit in the sense that we know how we got here, that in itself, if you could share that with other believing Christians, especially people that care about our nation. Because most people haven't thought about the fact, oh, we got an unelected Supreme Court and changed the meaning of the Constitution, and that's why we got all these problems. That's why we got all these problems. Other nations, they passed it through their people and their parliaments. So those policies have more legitimacy than they do here. They have no legitimacy here because an unelected Supreme Court, unelected lawyers with robes on, with ink in their pen, decided they wanted to impose that on the American people. What do you call somebody that never has to stand for election, that's appointed for life, and they can enforce by the rule of law, or enforce by the force of law, their social engineering on you? And that's nothing less than judicial tyranny. I'll leave you with the answers, because it involves all of us. I bring power cord up here. How many people were here for my first presentation like a year ago? Just a couple. Remember when I used this as an illustration to represent the exercise of government power? And so, you know, government is not supposed to act unless it has a power source. All right? And the power source for our government is what? The Constitution. So before Congress acts or anybody acts, they have to, before they can use their power, they have to plug into the power source. You all with me so far? Well, we've got a little bit of time. You want a little bit more of an illustration, or you want me to kind of wrap up? How are we doing here? A little more, okay. All right, Congress has to plug in. So let me use the Affordable Care Act as an illustration. When Congress passed Obamacare, they had to have a power source. Well, medicine, that's not in there. Regulation of medicine, that's not in there. The 10th Amendment says if it's not listed in here, if it's not one of the power sources here, then it's reserved to the States and the people, well, they said, well, we're going to get around that. We're going to find something else. Oh, it must be commerce. Commerce can regulate the commerce power. So they plugged into the commerce power and they passed the law of Obamacare. Well, it went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, no, that's not a proper power source. Obamacare is unconstitutional. How many people read that? That actually happened. It was on page 23 in the very, very fine print of your Detroit News, but it was in there. But the Obama administration sent up their Solicitor General, which is their lawyer, and they said, you know, us lawyers, we always have to have a backup plan. So we've got, if you don't like the commerce power, there's the taxing power. Now, we don't want the people to know this, that we're arguing this, because it'd be the largest tax ever imposed on people in the United States history. But if you don't like the commerce power, it's a tax. It's a tax. Well, they looked at it, hey, IRS can enforce this, it's a fine, it's a tax. And so a majority of the Supreme Court said because of the taxing power, Obamacare is a legitimate law. Well, the second thing we need to know about this Constitution is not only do you have to have a power source before you can act, even if you have a power source, you cannot use your power that you had a power source for in a way that interferes with our fundamental liberty, like our freedom of speech or our free exercise of religious office. So another case that we have, we represent a large company in Florida who has hundreds of employees. They provide, it's a very important company for the nation's infrastructure with regard to electricity and the grids. But you know what? In spite of it being very important to our nation, the president was a Christian. And he said, this Obamacare stuff, it's telling me I got to participate in abortions with my employees, and I will not do that. I will shut down my company. Well, you're not going to shut down your company. We'll shut it down for you. And they attempted to fine them millions of dollars, at which point we stepped in and filed a lawsuit. And so far we've won. We've got a judge that has stopped it, and hopefully with the new administration, we're very close to having the suit dismissed or won completely. But my point is, do you see what happened? Even if you have a power source that you've plugged into for Obamacare, you still can't use your power in a way that interferes with our liberty, like our liberty of religious conscience. And so this president of this company was very correct in saying, come help me protect my religious liberty. And so, you know, that's what we did. Now, here's why I brought the court out. Congress has some other powers here. They have some other power sources. And these power sources are designed and can be used to check this branch of government. One of the sources, and I'm going to list them in order of political feasibility, whether it's politically feasible that it happen. The first one is, we have the power of the purse. Remember I told you they have the power of the tax? Well, if you have the power of the tax, guess what they do? They take all that money, then they spend it. Where do you think all that marble came from? Where do you think the mahogany inside came from, and all the books, and all the computers, and all the law clerks, and all the other fancy stuff that's inside that building? It came from your taxpayer dollars appropriated by Congress. Congress has the spending power. What if Congress started holding some hearings and saying, hey, federal judiciary, what are you doing acting outside your Article 3 authority? You're supposed to decide disputes. You're not supposed to make policy. You're not supposed to jam social engineering down the 300 million people in our nation. That's our job. We do that. And then we have to stand for election based on the policy we made. You don't get to make abortion legal and same-sex marriage legal and going in the bathroom and all this stuff. So, you know, we're going to have a hearing. Come on over. We're deciding how much money we're going to give you this year. We're going to give you your salaries because the Constitution says we can't lower that, but nothing else. No more mahogany, no more desks, no more ink in your pen, no more law clerks, no more research assistants. And we'll start appropriating money back to the federal judiciary when you start acting within the scope of your proper constitutional authority. Can you imagine if they even held a hearing? What would happen? A shot across the bow? What would happen? They will hold a hearing if enough of us put pressure on them. But until they feel that pressure, they probably won't. Second most feasible power they have the power to strip the jurisdiction of this court. Under the Constitution, the federal judiciary is one Supreme Court. You don't even list the number of justices. It could be one Supreme Court with one justice. Under the Constitution, the federal judiciary is one Supreme Court, comma, and such other courts as Congress shall designate. So guess what? All of federal court jurisdiction has been created by Congress. So that's why we have all these federal district courts, like the guy in Michigan, that one judge that undid 2.7 million voters' will with the ink in his pen and said that same-sex marriage couldn't be in Michigan, even though the voters said it was one. Congress created that judge and that court. If Congress wanted to, tomorrow, the federal judiciary could be Chief Justice Roberts and his desk. And that's it. It could eliminate all the other courts. It could even, if it doesn't want to do all that, it could eliminate the jurisdiction of certain things that the court could no longer hear. You can't hear cases on abortion. You can't hear cases about, and you can't even use the word personal autonomy or identity. You can't hear cases on that anymore. And the Congress has actually used that power before, and effectively. And recently, for example, let me think of a recent example. Oh, there was a bunch of prisoners that, you know what prisoners do when they've got time on their hand. They file lawsuits, and then they file more lawsuits, and then they file more lawsuits after that. Well, what happened was Congress passed a law that said we're going to limit those number of lawsuits that you can file. Supreme Court struck it down. Congress came back and said, we're stripping you of jurisdiction to decide this. They can file this many cases, and that's it, and you can't decide this anymore. And the Supreme Court said, nope, they stripped our jurisdiction here, we can't do it. So that actually is how our Constitution, that's one of the checks and balances designed in our Constitution for the legislature to check the judiciary. Now, of course, there's the hammer out there. This is the least politically feasible, but I think probably the most effective. The House of Representatives over here can hold impeachment hearings and can impeach a Supreme Court or a federal judge. I was actually legal counsel at the Senate when we impeached a federal judge for, I mean, this was a really bad dude. I mean, he was engaging in corruption. He was convicted of criminal offenses. And he said, I'm appointed for life. I'm just going to keep collecting my salary for life in prison. No, we impeached him. The Senate, we impeached him. The House impeached him, and then the Senate has the power to remove a judge after the House has impeached him. That's a very powerful power. That's the hammer. Can you imagine, even if we didn't impeach any of the justices, that we started holding impeachment hearings on judges that acted outside their constitutional authority and decided to make up constitutional rights and decided to make up policy and brought them up there and say, what's your authority under the Constitution for doing this? You only get to serve during good behavior. This is very bad behavior because you're engaging in our job. That's our job. We impose policy, and then we have to stand for election for the people that we did the policy for. You don't represent anybody. This can happen. This can happen. There are other things out there. There's some movements to have to amend the Constitution where if 3/4 of the states or something, vote, they can undo a Supreme Court opinion. So there's a lot of different solutions that are out there. But the question is, do we have the will? And as I speak, sometimes I hit somebody's heart who's an organizer. And then all of a sudden, half a state is organized on a particular issue. Maybe that's going to happen tonight. Maybe not. Maybe God's called you to do different things. But I just want you to leave knowing here that there are solutions, that there are answers. And the answers rest, first of all, here with we the people, under a constitutional system that our founders foresaw this exact problem that we have right now and provided for these checks when they did happen. And so that's the political answer, and this is where I'll open up for questions. But again, the big answer is we don't win this battle in the legislature or the courtroom. We're going to win it in the pews. We're going to win it when we change the hearts of individuals, when we change our own heart, when we come back to that Jesus. I love that song. I'm coming back to the heart of Jesus. When we first ourselves come back to the heart of Jesus, and then through the way we live our lives and the way that we articulate these positions, we bring other people, to Jesus. That's how we change the heart of this nation, and that's how we will, bring us back. And what I pray for is revival. There could be one of two things that are going to happen in my lifetime or my son's lifetime, my daughter's lifetime. Is we're either going to have revival, and this generation will be the instrument that God uses to start that, or we're not. But I tell you, we still have the responsibility to get up every day and be obedient. Why? Because if you've noticed, all throughout world history, God always leaves a remnant for the next generation. So I don't know if God is calling each one of us in this room to preserve a remnant or to be the instrument of revival. I do know that He calls us every day to get up and go. What did Jesus say? He said, go. And so that's my challenge to you. So blessings to you, and I'll be happy to answer questions for as long as the last person has a question. If it gets a little later and people want to leave, I do have some gifts for you in the back. There's some books back there. If you'll move to contribute to help cover the cost of the books, appreciate that. But any questions? He asked, why are we using this impeachment? Because the people that have the authority to do that, House of Representatives, they work for us, and us have not put enough pressure on them to do it yet. And if they do it on their own, where they don't feel like they have enough support, the press will destroy them, and they'll lose their seats, and they're more concerned about keeping their seats than doing the right thing. But if we, the people, in a massive way, make them feel like they're going to lose their seats if they don't do the right thing, then they will act in their self-interest and hold impeachment hearings. That's a cynical answer, but I think it's a truthful one. Yes?
The FISA judge issue, okay? Why hasn't he come forward? They published who it is. They've had his picture. Is he protected anyway by his position?
He is probably trying to, as far as I know, and I am guessing, he's got to be madder than being a bond right now.
Then why can't he come forward?
Because and this is very hard to explain, but he is actually, I believe, trying to hold the integrity of the office and the position that he has above his own personal feelings.
But to us,
because the position is designed in a way to have judicial integrity so that our nation can be preserved. And I'm not going to defend him, but I'm going to say there's a very good chance he feels that if he comes forward and speaks publicly, that he'll be breaching that trust to the American people. And because he's not a politician, he's not elected.
I feel the opposite.
Yeah.
I feel that he has a duty in his position to come forward and explain from his position what happened and what he was told.
And I think if there's a way for that to happen, I hope it does. And especially if it can be done without breaching national security, that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that he's involved. I just can't imagine that.
Is there a way to force the issue? At some point in time, he's going to have to develop.
But let me point, this is a little bit different. These courts, there's 11 of them. They're handpicked by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And for the most part, they are the most senior, most respected judges in the judiciary. And so they are way above politics, and their heart is to preserve the nation, to preserve the judiciary. And so that court itself, now that being said, I mean, there's a whole lot of problems with the FISA law and a whole lot of potential for abuse. This isn't the first time that there's been contentions by, it's not a Republican or a Democratic thing, because both Republican administrations and Democratic administrations have, I think, quite rightfully been questioned on whether they're abusing that FISA court and abusing the power. What you're asking for is what every American wants, is transparency. One of the things that makes government work good is when you have transparency, when you have as much light as possible on government activities. The one place where that becomes very difficult is our national security. And so I think that judge probably will come forward in the right time, in the right form, in the right place where he knows that national security will be protected. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I tell you, I look at that and I say, if we don't resolve this, these are the steps that lead a nation towards civil war. And when the government no longer has legitimacy, and the press no longer is fulfilling its role of holding government accountable, but has chosen sides, which I don't know if you agree with me, but that's happened. We've already hit that place. It's very hard to find the truth right now. And right now, if CNN reported that this judge said such and such about this, you and I probably wouldn't believe it anyways. And so that's why I'm saying the judge probably will wait until he finds the right place, in the right forum, in a way where it can be done in a way that's legitimate. Yes?
Gladwin is relatively a small town, and there's a handful of people here compared to our population. As you're going around speaking to the different cities throughout the United States, is this indicative of how many, I'm going to use the word Christians, assuming that are, I'm going to assume people that are here.
It depends. We've had thousands sometimes, that's rare. But a lot of times the room will be this big. You know, one thing I've learned is God puts in a room who he intends to have in a room on a particular night. And I remember we had 50 or 60 one night at some church, and the person that organized it said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, we were expecting 300, and I just apologize, you're such a good da-da-da-da." And I said, no, God's got whoever he wanted to be here. And I was able to call that person about a month later, because someone who was in that audience organized an event where we had 1,000 people show up. And she organized the event because of what she heard that night in that audience. So I called the person up before and said, "Remember when you said you were so worried there was only 50? Well, you can just add 1,000 to it because the seed was planted." And so I don't ever look at the numbers, because God told the Israelites, you get 300, and, David's mighty men. I mean, you go with what God gives you and you trust in that. And I have seen him be faithful in that over and over again, whether it be big numbers or small numbers. So don't let, I mean, this is actually a nice number for Gladwin, right? What did we have? I mean, I think last time we had maybe 200 or something, but they heard me, so they didn't say we're going to stay away from this guy this time. What other questions?
Just a little off topic perhaps, but wondering why it was, and maybe you can help explain this, that when they tried to pass a pain possible abortion bill a few months back, they got 50-some votes, but yet didn't pass, compared to tax reform that did not get 60 votes, but did pass. And I know there's different regulations on how all that works. Could you help explain how that can be and how possible it might be to readdress the abortion situation?
And the other question is, how can a supposedly Christian, conservative, Republican-controlled House and Senate and President, fully fund Planned Parenthood like they just did a few weeks ago? I mean, it's astounding to me. Well, we had to compromise because we wanted to fund the military and they wanted us to fund this. Well, no, you're in control of that. You're going to take some heat in the press is what you're saying, right? And in answer to your question, and this is the part of politics that I just sometimes get angry about. It's called sausage making, and I don't know. You have this incredible sausage night the day before hunting season that I come up and share, and most of you have probably been there. But I tell you what you haven't done, and I have done this. If you've ever been in the process when it gets made, it's kind of it's not as tasty and not as interesting. And very often people have likened the legislative process to sausage making, and that's the answer to your question. What they did is it's so ugly because we've got that pain-capable thing, and then we've got that actually can stop the killing of an unborn son or daughter, and then we've got another one that is a the born alive piece of legislation. And what specifically happened in the case that you're asking about is they are going to get less pressure from the pro-abortion people if we pass this one, because this doesn't involve any abortions. This doesn't save any unborn lives. This just saves lives of babies that were born. And so they made a strategic position. We'll put both of these in the hopper, and then we'll pass one, and the pro-life people will be happy. Hate to say it, but that was the conversations that I heard have. And that's why pain capable is still sitting in the Senate. And the reason that Planned Parenthood is funded is because Republicans wanted an easy funding for, and it wasn't easy. You saw it even with this, it wasn't easy. They wanted to fund the military, which is the proper role of government, was to protect us. But the cost of that is we're going to continue funding this industry. You know, there's this group called Equality Michigan. You know, I struggled to get enough gas money to come up. I left a full-time job where I was able to provide for my family, and the Lord blessed us wonderfully for many years. I read the Obergefell same-sex marriage decision, saw this is nothing about same-sex marriage. This is how we're going to change the way we govern ourselves for the next 100 years. So my wife and I got debt-free in 6 weeks. And I've been a missionary for the culture of doing this ever since, for nothing. Basically nothing. And because, like you, we are feeling a call to be here tonight to make this fight. And then I look and I read and I find out last week that Equality Michigan, which is on the other side of every one of these issues, always attacking us, always filing these super funded litigation, they got $1 million last year. Because the LGBT community, you know, for the most part, they're not raising 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids and going to football practice and teaching the violin and, you know, putting money in the church plate. They're putting all their money in this battle here. They're putting all their money in this battle here. And then, okay, so I'm saying, well, you know what, the Lord, you know, you took care of the sparrows, you take care of the flowers, and we're not hungry, and we got a roof on our head that's not leaking. And so I am at peace going forward. And then I find out that of that $1 million, far more than we took in all last year for our programs, they received from the state of Michigan, your taxpayer dollars, you know, somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 of your taxpayer dollars to fund battles against everything that we stand for here. And I'm thinking, you know, we put an attorney general in there that's a Christian. We put a lieutenant governor that's a Christian. Come on, this is the type of thing. This is why you're there, to stop this crap. And so I don't know. You know, again, it sometimes can tear your gut out, because you do feel like David and Goliath. But you know what? David was given the equivalent of that $1 million before he went in. Remember all the armor that he was given, the very best weaponry of the times, and it just didn't fit. It just didn't work. And so it took a few stones. And he went in there with the faith of God. And he stood against a giant that was defying, as he said, how dare you defy the living God? And so that's what we're doing. And what I hope I'm doing tonight is giving you a few stones in your sling. And trust in God that he will do his part. And he has always been faithful, I can tell you that. In this process, on the hard days and on the easy days and on the hard days, he is always faithful. He's always been faithful. Good question. Yes?
You mentioned the Williamston school system. Are you getting any feedback with any problems with Christian camps. And the reason I mention that is I had a conversation today with someone whose board is meeting next week in the southern part of the state. And they have a parent who wants to send a child to camp who is a transgender. So
Yeah.
what do they do?
Is it a Christian camp?
Pardon me, yes, Christian camp.
And all of a sudden, the transgender wants to go to a Christian camp. You don't think that that's a setup? Of course it is. I have not heard from that. We've expected that. And I'm not saying we don't need to love on this kid, because this kid's hurting, but the other side is, I'm up there fighting against legislators that are proposing legislation that would make it a crime for pastors to try and counsel that person. And a crime, not a civil action, but a crime for counseling. And these people need love of Christ and leave their, and sometimes when they get it, I can't tell you, we've got a number of people in our organization that support our organization that used to live in that lifestyle, that have come to Christ, and they no longer live in that lifestyle, and they stand up and they speak and they tell, you want to see a Christian getting persecuted? You be somebody that used to live in the LGBTQ lifestyle and say, I was a sinner, I was wrong, I stopped it, and now I'm following Christ. You watch how fast you get persecuted when you're like that. But it's there. And so to answer your specific question, though, I have not heard about camps. We've been expecting things like that. If you know the person that on that board, what I would suggest you do is have them go to our website, greatlakesjc.org. We've got information back there. I've got pamphlets. That's our legal division. Salt Lake Global is our ministry. The legal division is called the Great Lakes Justice Center. On that website, we've got guidelines to help them prepare for that type of thing, and how they can write what they need to do for their constitution and all these things, so that they can protect themselves when somebody does. And I'm not saying this is a setup for sure, but I can tell you, I can give you quite a number of churches in Michigan specifically, but all over the nation, where what will happen is a sweet little couple, there'll be 2 women come in, or 2 men come in, they'll be sitting, they'll come to your church for 6 weeks. Oh, we've been attending your church for 6 weeks, we'd like to start teaching Sunday school. Or we would like you to marry us. And the whole reason they're coming to your conservative, orthodox, traditional, Bible-believing church is so that you can be challenged and see.
Wasn't it at your last session where you mentioned about having a policy in place?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you go to the website, there is suggested policies and language there that you can help draft to protect yourself.
Are there policies for churches on
Yes.
that website?
Yep. Yes, in the back.
I have 2 questions. Earlier you mentioned that this struggle is an opportunity to reach out, to evangelize, minister to the other side. How do you, as a lawyer who's fighting these people, opposing them in court, do that? And the second part of the question is, how do you recommend that non-lawyers who are engaged in the struggle through activist groups do that with their counterparts?
Yeah. Well, I can't say it's ever happened in the courtroom, but I can say that at talks like this, not necessarily at a church, but we speak to civic groups and political groups, and very often in there, that's when, or it'll be a debate. Very often in a place like that, then you'll have a lot, and all of a sudden, they see me engaging them, first of all, as a person, and shaking their hand, looking at them, and the Bible says a lot about this. I mean, if they're going to be cold and they're going to just be your opposition, and you've got, there's a time where you dust off your sandals and you move on. But if you're engaging on a personal level and you connect on a personal level, then you can very slowly start talking. Okay, now you trust each other to be able to have a conversation about the weather. Now we have a conversation to talk about, well, there are differences in this nation, and we probably should be talking about them instead of just fighting each other. And then that conversation progresses. How do you see me in my position? Let me correct that. Let me change that for you. Because they've been indoctrinated to think that we just hate them. I mean, they truly, truly, truly believe that we hate them because they've been told that by so many people. And when it works, and it doesn't work often, and it doesn't work a lot, and you don't get to have a chance to have a lot of these conversations. And when you have these conversations, they don't always, lead to, some type of conversion. But occasionally, if you can get to that personal level where they can see that you do not hate them, and they convince you that, because they think you hate them, and then they probably think that they must hate, I hate you. Well, oh yeah, I really don't hate you. Okay, well now we got that in common. And then one thing leads to another, and then we can start talking truth. Because they believe that truth doesn't exist. And then all it takes is a little bit of apologetics. And all of a sudden, even they see, because God puts the law in their heart as well, that truth exists. And now they're in a situation, because now they know the truth, and they know the choice that they've made. And so that's the process that I personally, had the opportunity to go through. And again, it's rare that you get to that, toward that later conversation where now, okay, wow, there is right and wrong, there is good and bad. Because I was always told what's good for me is good for me, and what's good for you is good for you. And then with just a little bit of apologetics and 3 or 4 questions, you can show them that that's not a correct statement. You can teach them about the law of non-contradiction, rule of non-contradiction. And you do these things that all of a sudden now on an intellectual level, they've conceded that we're not being unreasonable on this side. And they can see from my heart that I don't hate them. Now we can have a really good conversation. And I can talk about my sin. And I can talk how I needed Jesus. And one of the ways I do it, and everybody will have your own way. But I got to serve, I was privileged to serve as a judge, and so I was given that sword, that power. And before I did that, I had to put my hand on the Bible and swear an oath that I would, and affirm that I would uphold the Constitution, so help me God. That was to remind me that before you're given the privilege of the sword and the power, and to exercise that kind of power, there's a God. There's somebody higher than you, and nobody's above the law, nobody's above God, even you as a judge or a prosecutor. And then, okay, now, as a judge, people would come in front of me. And they would have maybe done some horrible things, and they may have been convicted. And so now it's sentencing time. And I use that as a story. Because God cannot tolerate sin. And the penalty is death. And just like the person in front of me, they know what the penalty is. They know what they're facing. The judge just hasn't rendered it yet. Now imagine somebody coming in and the judge saying, well, instead of sentencing you to death, today you are forgiven. And then I explain how this is what Jesus does. God is a just God. You may have heard about the loving God at your church, but he's also a just God. He cannot tolerate sin. But you know what? Not only is he a just God, he's a loving God. And he loves us so much that he took the penalty for us. And I use that kind of that judge discussion. And I tell you, it's not been very often, but it's happened enough that I don't come in as a warrior and my job is just to clean this, just to clean the floor with you. Our job is to win your soul as well. We need to fight our argument, preserve religious liberty, preserve religious expression, but let's not ever, ever miss a chance to tell and share somebody the good news of Jesus. Anything else? You guys have been a blessing. And I want to thank everybody that organized this. I know there are a number of pastors that made this happen. I always need to thank the Hollicks they open up their home anytime I'm in this area, and I eat really good up here, and I sleep really good, and you guys I feel family to me, so God bless you guys. Thank you.
Excuse me, before you all leave, I wanted to mention, I think you probably saw an example of grace here. I have seen many examples. And I don't know if any of you felt anger as some of these things happen. But that is something that I think that it is a cue to us that maybe we have some issues in our own life if we get angry. Because we probably have a tendency in that in ourselves. Because anger is not from God. So, if those tendencies came out, then maybe we are turning people off. Maybe we aren't being the loving person that we should be. And I think the church has lost its way in that regard in some degree. But Professor Wagner is right. I mean, a little over 3 years ago, this was an incredible debate in his life because he had a successful occupation as a professor, but he took that step of faith, and just tonight he got a phone call from a panicked woman from Connecticut that the social worker was knocking on her door of her homeschool home just tonight. And he couldn't give counsel in Connecticut because he's not in Connecticut, but he was able to give direction to this mom and say, you are within the law, but I want you to realize that he's on his own, and the Justice Laws, or the Great Lakes Law Centers, is the same thing. It takes us. It takes us. Lord bless you all. Thank you.
We're going to do a love offering for Professor Wagner. He has one. Can you come back up here? I know he wants us to sing Heart of Worship again, but our musicians are also ushers tonight. So, but I sense in you some of the burden of ministry, and I understand that. Many of us here do. And I want to pray for you, and I also want to pray for a love offering. But I want to pray a blessing over you, and because it's the right thing to do. So if we can stand together, if there are some that want to come around, let's lay some hands on William and lift him up before the Lord.
Come on up, man.
So, Father, we are here in this room from different churches in our community, and we love the same. We love you so much, Lord. And we serve together for the common purpose of making the love of Jesus known in this world. And Father, tonight, as Professor Wagner was sharing, as William was sharing, I just sense that he has just a need to know that he is supported, that he is loved, that he is being held up in prayer. Lord, I know that the burden of ministry sometimes seems heavy. And the truth is, Lord, it's too heavy for us. But your Holy Spirit empowers us and fills us. And Lord, tonight I pray that he would know that he is empowered and filled by your Holy Spirit. I ask that you would keep your hand upon him. I pray that he would be encouraged. And Lord, I pray that we would be mindful to hold him up in your prayers. And Lord, I thank you that you've given him a heart for those who are lost. That he was able to see the opposition through your eyes and how you must hurt and how deceptive sin is. So, Father, I pray that you continue to use him for truth. I pray that you would help us to be faithful followers of you. And Lord, I pray that you would just bless this ministry, and that we pray this all now, asking your blessing over the love offerings and how we're able to encourage them tonight. And pray us all in your